this comes from, because a lot of us who see this as crazy, this refusal to even acknowledge that there's costs and benefits with any policy discussion, which is the proper way, by the way, to approach any policy discussion, an honest assessment of costs and benefits and trade-offs. There are no solutions. There are only trade-offs, and it very, very, almost never can you find a particular policy prescription that has only good things attached to it and no trade-offs whatsoever.
Yes, and also no unintended outcomes, which is another thing that conservatives stress. It's like, are you so sure that intervention is going to do what you think it is? It's like...
Right. There's a series of questions that we might ask. Does it infringe on local rights? Does it infringe on the rights of the individual? Does it provide a disincentive to do a good thing in society? Does it have unintended consequences? Is it fiscally responsible in the long term? The reason I don't get along of a policy perspective with so many Democrats is because they ask none of these questions. They just ask, is it compassionate? Mm-hmm. It seems to be the only question.
Well, and compassion is a very interesting virtue because, look, if you're compassionate and your baby is crying and the baby is 6 months old, the right thing to do is whatever's necessary to stop the baby from crying because the baby is right and you're wrong. Compassion isn't sufficient virtue. That's partly why we have conscientiousness, which is a more cold virtue. It's like, well, it might be compassionate now, but what makes you think, even with infants, the problem arises. It's like, well, you don't want to treat your 3-year-old like he or she is 6 months old, right? You want to start fostering their independence because you're looking at more than immediate suffering. You're looking at the stable structure of their existence across time, and conscientiousness in some sense is better positioned to do that. Yeah, this default to compassion is, well, it's a problem.
And we have a hard time articulating the right answer to that in a way that doesn't make you sound like an uncaring, uncompassionate person. And it's like it's a rhetorical trick. When somebody hits back at you if you disagree on a policy with, but don't you care about the people who need help? And now the technical answer is, well, yes, I do, but you have to do the A, B, and C. And by the time you're explaining, you've already lost the argument because it's an inherently emotional argument. You might be right from a pragmatic point of view, but you don't sound compassionate. You don't want to spend the money on the new program. And the program might be for the puppies, and who doesn't love puppies?
Right.
And how could you be against that?
Right.
And you might be against it because you don't think the program will have a good bang for its buck, or that or in the long run will continue to amass more funding and really not be as effective. It doesn't matter. You're already explaining and you've lost the argument. So I don't even know. I don't know if you've encountered that.
Yes, it's unbelievably powerful. It's a very, very powerful problem, this default to compassion. It's a very big problem.
And going back to what you talked about before on ideology and how the great religions have created a structure that is, I don't know what that is very well done, I suppose. It's the perfect structure to think about. It's complete. Why is it so easy despite that, why is it so easy for so many in the modern society to just dismiss the truths of religion and attack it so viciously?
Well, I think it's partly because we're not sure exactly what it is. An atheist will assume that the statement, I believe in God, is akin to, I believe that a table is real. And the evidence for God isn't the same as the evidence for a table. And so you lose right off the bat in some sense if you're religious and you accept that level of argumentation, but it's very complicated. It's like, well, people ask me if I believe in God, and I say, well, I act as if God exists. And they don't like that answer. But I thought through that answer a lot. It's like, well, how do you judge someone's belief? By what they say or by what they do? And that just starts the philosophical argument. It's another example of the fact that it's very difficult for us to rationally defend evolved institutions because they weren't exactly constructed on the basis of rational argument. They emerged across time, like marriage emerged across time. All these institutions, it wasn't like a central planning committee sat down and thought them through precisely. And so we don't have an articulated defense at hand.
I think the reason people don't like on either side of the argument, maybe don't like your answer, is because they want to get at the question of faith, and they're trying to make you answer that question.
Right, but they have a misconception about what constitutes faith. Like, I can give you an example. So you might say, well, faith means that you believe things that can't be empirically demonstrated. Or I could say, well, no, wait a minute. If I say I have faith in you, that doesn't mean I believe you exist. That's foolish. I have faith in you because I think there's a spark of the divine in you, and that you might be willing to allow it to manifest itself across time. I'm willing to take a risk on you in the belief that taking that risk would increase the probability that that manifestation would take place. I have faith in my fellow man, let's say, and that's an act of courage, and that's faith. It's like, well, why? Look at how vicious and vindictive people are. Yeah. So there's plenty of evidence for that, but I've decided that I'm not going to consider that evidence crucial, partly because I believe that if you meet someone with open arms, let's say, you radically increase the probability that the best in them will emerge. That's faith. So people they have a misapprehension about what constitutes faith, and I can understand that, because religious fundamentalists are set on edge by rational critique, scientific critique, and the scientists come at them hard. You really think the world is 5,000 years old? It's like, they don't know what to say. Yes, because the Bible says that. Well, not really. One person who interpreted the Bible made that case, but there are many interpretations that don't depend on that particular viewpoint, but that's beside the point. Yeah. It's like, that isn't the right level of argumentation, and it's so hard to get this right. And so it devolves into something like a competition between theories.